Hello again, Accounting 201 students. We are going to continue on with our discussion in Chapter 2, a further look at financial statements. We are going to identify and compute ratios for analyzing a company's liquidity and solvency using a balance sheet. Here is an illustration of Best Buy's balance sheet. This is a classified balance sheet, as we discussed earlier. We will use the information from this balance sheet to compute the ratios later on in this recording. You can learn a lot about a company's financial health by also evaluating the relationship between its various assets and liabilities. If you're a lender or a company granting credit, you will be interested in the liquidity of the company you are granting credit. Liquidity is the company's ability to pay obligations expected to become due within the next year or operating cycle. You would look closely at the relationship of its current assets to its current liabilities. Working capital is one measure, which is the difference between the amounts of current assets and current liabilities. When working capital is positive, there is greater likelihood that the company will pay its liabilities. When working capital is negative, a company might not be able to pay short-term creditors, and the company might ultimately be forced into bankruptcy. Best Buy has negative working capital. It does not necessarily mean the company has liquidity problems, but it does warrant further investigation. Liquidity ratios measure the short-term ability of the company to pay its maturing obligations and to meet unexpected needs for cash. One liquidity ratio is the current ratio, computed as current assets divided by current liabilities. And for Best Buy, it was 8,192, and their current liabilities were 8,435, so their current ratio is 0.97 cents to 1. What that ratio actually means is that Best Buy's 2009 current ratio of 0.97 to 1 means that every dollar of current liabilities, Best Buy has 97 cents of current assets. Best Buy's current ratio decreased in 2009. One potential weakness of the current ratio is that it does not take into account the composition of the current assets. A satisfactory current ratio does not disclose whether a portion of the current assets is tied up in slow-moving inventory. The composition of the current assets matters because a dollar of cash is more readily available to pay the bills than is a dollar of inventory. For example, suppose a company's cash balance declined while its merchandise inventory increased substantially. If inventory increased because the company is having difficulty selling its products, then the current ratio might not fully reflect the reduction in the company's liquidity. So in this example, for every dollar of current liabilities, Best Buy had 97 cents of current assets. You can also compare it to the other, H.H. Gregg, and then the industry average. Using a classified balance sheet for solvency. Now suppose that instead of being a short-term creditor, you're interested in either buying Best Buy stock or extending the company a long-term loan. Long-term creditors and stockholders are interested in the company's solvency, its ability to pay interest as it comes due and to repay the balance of a debt due at its maturity. Solvency rates measure the ability of the company to survive over a long period of time. The debt to total assets ratio is one source of information about long-term debt-paying ability. It means the percentage of total financing provided by creditors rather than stockholders. Debt financing is more risky than equity financing because debt must be repaid at specific points in time, whether the company is performing well or not. Thus, the higher the percentage of debt financing, the riskier the company. We compute the debt to total assets ratio as total debt divided by total assets. So in Best Buy, 11,183 divided by 15,826 equals 71%. The 2009 ratio means that every dollar of assets was financed by 71 cents of debt. The higher the percent of total liabilities to total assets, the greater the risk that the company may be unable to pay its debts as they come due. In this illustration, Best Buy and H.H. Gregg, along with the 2009 industry average, you can see that Best Buy financed 71 cents of debt. It exceeds the industry average of 57% and is higher than H.H. Gregg's ratio of 64%. The higher the ratio, the more reliant the company is on debt financing. This means the company has a lower equity buffer available to creditors if the company becomes insolvent. Thus, from the creditor's point of view, a higher ratio debt to total assets is undesirable. Best Buy's solvency appears lower than H.H. Gregg's and lower than the average company in the industry. The adequacy of this ratio is often judged in the light of the company's earnings. Generally, companies with relatively stable earnings, such as public utilities, can support higher debt to total assets ratios than can cyclical companies with widely fluctuating earnings, such as high-tech companies. In later chapters, we will learn more ways to evaluate solvency. Here's a review question for you. The following ratios are available for Lear Incorporated and Stable Incorporated. It has their current ratio, their debt to assets ratio, or earnings per share. Using what we have talked about in the PowerPoint, come up with what you think is the right answer. The correct answer is D, higher liquidity and lower solvency, but profitability cannot be compared based on information provided. Now if you turn in your textbook to page 85, I'd like to go over problem 2.5b, section A, numbers I, 2, Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, and 5. They are wanting you to use the information and compute the current ratio. Remember, the current ratio is current assets divided by current liabilities. Using these numbers, you would come up with 2.01. Roman numeral 2, they want you to calculate working capital, which is current assets minus current liabilities. Using the numbers they gave you, you would come up with working capital of $149,900. Roman numeral 3 wants you to calculate the debt to total assets ratio, which is total liabilities divided by total assets. Here's the answer you should get, 33%. And Roman numeral number 5, they want you to calculate the earnings per share, which is net income minus preferred stock dividends, divided by the average common shares outstanding. You'll notice they did not have any preferred stock dividends. Here's your answer for Roman numeral 5, which is $1.53. This problem is very similar to the one that I want you to complete, which is problem 2-5A, section A, Roman numeral 1, 2, 4, and 5. If you would write or key your answers in a Word document, make sure that you show your work. In other words, I want the equation shown on there. and submit it into Moodle. Talk to you later.